Side 3. By Thursday, November the 19th, the 30th day of the strike, the whole of the families at Willington, Oakenshaw and Bransford collieries had been turned out of their houses. The settlement of the dispute seems to be as distant as ever. Brandon Colliery pitmen are perturbed. The owners are reported to be seeking the eviction of the men on strike. The weather during November has been mild. It is hoped that it continues so for the evicted families. The men have been peaceable and orderly. To deter any outbursts of passion, all of Messrs. Straker and Love's agents have been sworn in as special constables. A meeting was held in Gateshead by a few of the representatives of the men on strike. Matthew Charlton, a collier of Brandon Colliery, gave some account of his experience at the colliery and the hardships he had borne there. He said they intended to stand out. Adding to their worries, Will Garbett lost his 3-year-old daughter Anne. Matthew Brown and William Snowden, both striking colliers, each had a bereavement in the family. Matthew lost his 2.5-year-old son William. The Snowdens lost their 3.5-year-old daughter Jane. The bereaved family lost 3 young children in the space of 5 months. All were buried at Bransford. Meetings are being held at regular intervals. Delegates travelled to Newcastle on December the 11th. They said that the plight of the striking pitmen was serious. The men had been out 7.5 weeks. 1 week they got 3 shillings and a penny, another 3 shillings and 10 pence, another 4 shillings and 5 pence, and last week 5 shillings and 4 pence. One speaker believed it was Mr. Love's intention to starve the miners out. It was decided to impose a levy of 1 shillings and 6 pence per fortnight on working miners as long as the strike lasts. The application of the levy would be a welcome addition to the pittance striking miners of the Union in a drawing. Mr. Love sent the following letter from his home Mount Beulah in Durham. Notice to miners. Messrs. Straker and Love, owners of Bransford, Oakenshaw, Willington and Brandon collieries in the county of Durham, have resolved not to employ men connected with the miners' union. They offer work and good wages to pitmen who are at liberty to give their labour unrestricted. Upon the above-named collieries, the wages generally vary from 4 shillings to 7 shillings per day, but there are good workmen making from 8 shillings to 9 shillings per day at the present time. House, coals and garden for 6 pence per fortnight. Families will be removed free of cost. Bransford, Oakenshaw, Willington A Pit and Brandon collieries are all at work, and Willington B Pit, it is hoped, will soon commence work. Application to be made to the overman at the respective collieries. December the 5th, 1863. Mr. Love in his letter said that Brandon Colliery was at work. His information was proved to be incorrect. As the letter was being delivered, a large meeting of pitmen was held at Brandon Colliery. Mr. Lighton again took the chair. He stated that on the morning a delegation had proceeded to Mr. Love's residence in Durham and made known their visit. They waited in the yard a short time when a servant came to them and said that Mr. Love would not receive any more deputations from his men and that he could not be seen. On the motion of Mr. Dickinson, seconded by Mr. Lamb, a vote of thanks was passed amid cheers to the editors of the Durham Chronicle and Durham Advertiser for the calm, clean and temperate manner they had covered the strike. Another big meeting was held on Saturday, December the 12th. A reporter from the Newcastle Daily Chronicle noted complaints from men whose collieries were involved in the dispute. At Oakenshaw, 45 families had been ejected from their homes. It was stated that a woman named Bird, while in a state of pregnancy, had been put out of a house and had died in childbirth a few days later. Jack Scott, Brandon Colliery, stated that when their pit first started about 6 years ago, their standard weight was 8.5 hundredweights per tub for the first 3 months. Then a quarter hundredweight was added, for which 6 pence per score of 21 tubs was paid. This continued for 4 months, when another half hundredweight was added. After 18 months, half hundredweight more. 2 years elapsed, when half hundredweight 4 pounds extra was put, making a total of 10 1/4 hundredweights 4 pounds. No higher price being paid for any of the extra filling after the 6 pence for the first additional quarter hundredweight. The same dissatisfaction existed amongst them as at Bransford. They often remonstrated against the big filling and confiscation, but it was of no use. Mr. Love told them he did not want more than 1, at another time 2 tubs per day per man confiscated. For the same reasons as the Bransworth men, they joined the Union, and the same system of sacrifice was resorted to against them. Jack Scott went on to say that the cinder drawers had suffered reductions of about 4 shillings and sixpence a week. Young John Henry Garbutt, not yet 8, did not understand why families were being put out of their homes onto the street. Even at such a tender age, he realised that something was amiss. Mr. Love had obtained a number of ejectment summonses at Durham County Police Court on Monday, December the 14th. 2 days later, the evictions began and were continued on the Thursday. John Henry would never forget the women's tears and the men's curses as their furniture was heaped in the street. Prospects looked bleak indeed for Christmas. After weeks of struggle on the meagre strike pay from the Union, men drifted back to work. Weeks of threats, cajolery, then finally eviction had sent the last dissident pitman, cap in hand, to seek to renew his bond. All the strikers were back at work on December the 28th. Cupid was at work during the strike. John Dunn, a 20-year-old pitman, married Catherine Westgarth. Another pitman, Tom Gill, married 18-year-old Mary Burrell. Into 1864. Jane McDermott swept away what remained of a thick carpet of snow which had drifted into her backyard in Railway Street. Her kitchen mat would be preserved from her children's snow-covered feet. She drew her shawl across her shoulders and leaned against the wooden partition, only a skeleton of its former self, joining the 2 yards, and chatted with her neighbour, Anne Hay. They agreed that last year had been the grimmest of their lives. Smallpox had stricken the district. Their families had suffered, some more than others. The Snowden family had lost 3 youngsters in the space of 5 months. John Michael, 7 months, William, 5-year-old, and Jane, 3 years and a half. Out of a total of 37 Colliery Road deaths, 26 were infants. Whilst the strike had snapped the bond tying man to master, it had strengthened neighbourly ties. Edward Forster, who breeds pigs in his garden across the road from his house in South Street, killed one of his stock. John Madgen, butcher of High Street, procured the cheapest cuts of beef. Many kind friends had contributed to the support of the stricken families. For the first 3 weeks of the strike, men of the families had 8 shillings and 3pence, 7 shillings and 5pence, and 7 shillings and 10pence to live on. Their weekly allocation reduced as the strike continued. Fortunately, potatoes at the Durham market were down to 5pence a stone. Jane and Anne returned to their family duties, each with the sincere hope that the year ahead would blot out the unhappy memories of 1863. Now that work was fully resumed at the colliery, pitmen with their families have moved into houses vacated during the strike. William Dixon moved to Brandon Colliery. He is a 34-year-old collier born in Cumberland. His wife Maria, 30 years of age, was born at Sunderland Bridge, only about 2 miles away. Their home, 26 South Street, also houses 2 boarders, James Clark and James Kelly, a colliers. They hail from Ireland. Easter Saturday. Whole families walked the mile to Langley Grove, where Mr. Smith held the 3rd annual Sports Day. Glorious pink sunshine accompanied the main event, the 1-mile race for the champion belt. As on previous occasions, the crowd enjoyed the day. Pitmen from the surrounding area, being grateful for a day of festivity, applauded Mr. Smith for organising the event. Next day, all families attended the first Easter service to be held in the new Connection Chapel, built a few yards from the Colliery Inn. Mr. Love had provided the chapel cum school to obviate the walk to East Brandon School. Brandon Colliery now has chapel, pit and inn almost within touching distance of each other. With braces dangling from drab trousers, the vested figure shuffled across the wide street, his stockingless feet chilled inside unlaced boots. Numerous stones helped him cross the wheel-rutted waste. Thomas Turner, collier aged 39, had just recently moved to Brandon Colliery from Jarrow with his wife and family of 4 daughters and a son. Thomas liked a quiet read. His rowdy brood denied him the pleasure. From the second netty down, pipe smoke sneaked between gaps in the door. Paper rustled. The weekly Durham Advertiser was being read in comparative peace. An old edition of the paper, cut into ample squares, is pinned to the door. Every week the dustman calls. Richard Issop is 66. He was born at Sunderland Bridge. His wife Maria, 52 years of age, was born at Westwick. Their grandchildren, Anne and John Holiday, born in Unwick, live with them. Richard's shaggy-coated horse patiently accepts the shower of spent ashes, refuse and excrement his master shovels from the netty into the cart. A plot of land, once farmland, lies slightly to the north of the colliery. Is now in use as an ash tip. Small fires liberally dot the tip's crown. Square pieces of old newspaper await their turn for incineration. Other pieces, wind-blown, festoon the farmer's edge. John Dixon, coal hewn at the age of 52, was tired. After a long life of labour in the pit, he started work underground at the age of 10. He desired something easier than hewing coal in a wall. His shift was half spent, yet the tub was only half full. Working in a wall is lonely work. His putter, knowing conditions in a wall, would not call. He would assume the tub would last out John's shift. The deputy had paid his routine visit. John sat on his crackhead and resumed hewing. Particles of coal stung his face and arm as his pick dislodged an unsatisfactory amount of coal from the solid, spiteful coal face. His supply of sharp picks was almost exhausted. His hands, sore with gripping the wooden pick shaft, were beginning to fester. John dreaded the thought of losing work through bad hands. He urinated on them. Feeling some measure of relief, he once more wielded his pick. Until the wall had been cut through with a pillar of coal, John knew that his wage depended on the deputy's generosity. John's pay note, previous to working in the wall, read, John Dixon, tubs hewed, first week 5 shifts, 97, second week 6 shifts, 107, total hewed for 11 shifts, 204, hewn price £2 6 shillings and 8 halfpenny, narrow work and price 4 yards at 6 is 2 shillings, and 8 yards at 5 is 3 shillings and 4 consideration 6 amount of earnings £2 12 shillings and 6 halfpenny, average over 11 shifts 4 shillings and 9 per shift. Anna and John Henry Garbutt, each cosily swathed in calico nightclothes, waited expectantly on the brown painted settle built by the side of the fireplace in their Durham Street home. The long hollow brass rod supported from the mantel shelf reflected the glow from the built-up fire. Rainwater collected from the bottle in the yard, effervescent in the fireplace boiler. Their father, the storyteller, lowered the oil lamp's flame and sat with back erect against the warm, round, black-leaded oven. Friday night was special for the older children. Their bedtime was delayed. John Henry remembered the Christmas of last year, when a combination of spent ashes and sparse wood, a result of the strike, were inadequate to warm the kitchen. He remembered too the song the pit lads had learned from their elders, a short defiant lyric which they had called the rocking song. The rocking, so shocking long, long we have bore, farewell to the rocking, we will rock them no more. The Reverend A.L. Butcher, the third of a trio of curates sent to help the vicar during the year, performed his first marriage ceremony when 24-year-old pitman James Smith married Mary Roberts. Mary is 21 years of age. Both live in the long Durham Street. The curate's predecessors had buried 28 colliery inhabitants. Of these, half were infants, victims of the epidemic still raging in Brandon Colliery. One survivor being William, son of William and Sarah Garbutt, born at number 14 Durham Street. Glossary, mat, floor covering, handmade from strips of old cloth woven on a frame. Wall, where a pillar of coal had to be split, a place called a wall was set away. Fester, a painful swollen condition. Settle, a long wooden seat fixed to the wall near the fireplace, very popular on cold nights. Into 1865. Edward Forster, a sturdy 57-year-old pit inspector, trudged through the snow, piled high across the street. It was the third day of the new year and bitterly cold. He carried a pail full of steaming pig swill. Edward swung open the door of the pigsty. With grunts of pleasurable anticipation, the hungry sow, of gargantuan proportion, followed the tantalizing pail across the street. The expert hands of Robert Foster, a 28-year-old colliery blacksmith, and Will, his 26-year-old banksman brother, waiting in the yard of their South Street home, secured the pig. A truly aimed downward blow sent the 41-stone sow rolling onto its side. Deft hands collected the gush of blood emanating from the sow's gashed throat into a spacious dish. Other willing hands set to and scraped the quivering flesh free of hair and dirt. Mrs. Forster kept the kitchen boiler bubbling. Fresh pork, sausages, black pudding, brawn and pig's trotters would all be relished by the family of 5 strapping sons and 3 daughters, all of whom were born at Thornley near Durham. The families Wood, Lidster, Green, Jackson, Ford and Dunn, neighbours who had, during the long period of feeding the monster, helped with potato peelings and vegetable waste, would not be forgotten. More families are moving into colliery rows, working stretched tentacle-like underground, requiring colliers, putters, stonemen and lads to man them. Joiners and blacksmith shops are expanding. Builders have erected almost 200 houses. These are occupied on completion. Sunderland Street, the latest to be built, is a long row of single houses stretching almost in the continuous line from High Street. It is built across the road from Durham Street. Here the workers with small families predominate. John Brady, a collier, had just finished his first shift, it being Monday. A 27-year-old Irishman, he had lived in Brandon Colliery only 3 weeks. He had come to marry a local girl. On reaching the shaft bottom, he walked into the cage hole. The cage descended on him, crushing him so severely that he died 2 hours later. On the day of the pit accident, the first fatal one underground, Mary Ellen Park, daughter of Sydney Park, died at the youthful age of 4 years and a half. Tragedy dogged the Park family. Just 3 weeks after the death of little Mary Ellen, her 7-year-old brother, John Thomas, was buried alongside her in St. Brandon's churchyard. Sisters Elizabeth and Anna Battensby, 5 years and 4 years, were also victims of the fever. Heavy boots flattened coarse grass and disturbed heather as a thin line of men with staffs swinging advanced. Screams rent the morning air. Bodies lay inert, torn flesh and broken bones, evidence of the unequal struggle. Pitman Joe Milburn's Brandon lad vied with George Thornton's best dog. Viscount Boyne's greyhounds took part. Beaters, spectators, greyhounds and owners left the field of conflict on which 18 heirs had met an untimely and vicious end. Isabella Parkinson, on seeing a recipe in the Durham Advertiser, decided with the help of her sister Martha, 16 years of age, to give the family a treat. Isabella, aged 19, decided to make apple pancakes for her 8 brothers and sisters. All were born in Monk Weymouth, from which place their father, Will, a 50-year-old collier, came to Brandon Colliery. Shrove Tuesday was a good day for pancakes. Apple pancakes. Half a teaspoon borax baking powder, a little salt, 2 tablespoonfuls of flour, add 2 eggs well beaten, add enough milk to make a smooth and rather thin batter, a little powdered cinnamon, grated lemon peel, 2 ounces of currants, 6 apples peeled and chopped. Mix well together. Melt some butter in a frying pan. Do not put the mixture in till quite hot. With such a large family to feed, which includes 3 pitmen, the sisters knew that the busy time lay ahead, watching the frying pan on the low hot fire. On Easter Saturday, the annual steeplechase organised by Mr. J. Smith of Langley Grove took place. Contestants and spectators came from Brandon Colliery and the surrounding area. The event is much looked forward to, especially when Mr. Smith arranges the day to coincide with Bath Week, when the pitmen are free on the Saturday. A noisy crowd cheered on the 27 valiant men who took part in the steeplechase, which was the main event of the day. As on previous occasions, the River Brownie proved a formidable obstacle. Bookies were out in force for this annual gathering. Hugh MacDermott preferred the country to the crowd. He left his home in Railway Street. His daughter, 12-year-old Alice, and 6-year-old Edward walked by his side. A delightful spring day invited a walk. With husband and 2 children from under her feet, Jane MacDermott could better cope with household chores. 4-year-old Mary Elizabeth and baby Catherine. Alice, not having had a close-up view of Bransworth Castle, suggested a visit. The turnpike at Meadowfield was left behind. Red Barns Farm was next, then Scripton Farm. The raucous rookery on the rise into the village was left behind. Edward was intrigued by the steam-driven saw in the mill set on the fringe of the village. Bransmith's one row of stone-built houses faced the line of stately chestnut trees which ended at the castle gate. The castle stood majestic in its own well-cared-for grounds. Deer and their fawn grazed at the foot of the battlement. Peacocks strutted just within the iron gates. A squirrel noisily scurried through nearby trees. Alice wanted to see a real live lord. She hoped that the gig would drive under the arch of the courtyard. She was greatly disappointed. The lord of the manor was not in residence. Hugh MacDermott, a knowledgeable man, told Alice how the owner of the castle acquired part of his wealth. In the agreement signed between Viscount Boyne and Messrs. Straker and Love, provision is made for royalties to be paid the Viscount for coal mined from under his land and properties. It derives a rent of 18 shillings per 10 out of 4,500 acres mined, and 20 shillings per 10 out of 2,000 acres mined, being the acreage leased to the colliery owners. As a 10 is slightly more than 48 tons, Alice's father reckoned the royalty claimed by the Viscount to be 4pence halfpenny per ton of coal hewn from the larger acreage and 5pence per ton from the 2,000 acres. Alice deduced that the Viscount received about half the amount the coal hewer himself earned for every ton of coal he sent to the surface. Alice also learnt that since 1856, when Brandon Colliery was sunk, that the colliery company had to supply annually 200 chaldrons of round coals and 100 chaldrons of small coals to the castle. These had to be delivered. Father, daughter and son, having had their close-up view of the castle, turned homewards. Hugh MacDermott, without rancour, swung Edward onto ample shoulders. With Alice by his side, he retraced his steps. His possessions were of intrinsic value. William Muse, James Newton, John Jefferson and George Blackett, all pitmen, walked the 3 miles to Durham to hear Edward Rymer, a pitman from Barnsley in Yorkshire, address a meeting of pitmen. He was a firm believer of a strong miners' association. He was an eloquent speaker. Those present heard him say, with respect to the county of Durham, he was sorry that they appeared as a black spot in England respecting the miners' association. They numbered about 1,000, but there were only 74 at the meeting. The hours of the men are 8 hours working, the average wage being from 4 shillings to 4 shillings and sixpence. The hours of the boy upon an average were 14 a day. The system with respect to the boys was the most wretched in the civilized world. They never saw the light of the blessed sun from Sabbath to Sabbath. He had authority to tell them that the district he represented begged of them through him to send help to save them from starvation and misery. Josh Stevens of South Street was grievously worried. His chest pained. He could scarcely breathe. Even short walks became a trial. His favourite pastime, that of walking up the hill to his Brandon, resting a while to relish the scenic panorama, then a leisurely saunter home was denied him. He hogged dust-laden phlegm from his protesting lungs. He had not yet confided in his wife. He dreaded his daily struggle as a coal hewer. Every breath, every swing of his pick were becoming an agony. He more than suspected that he had miner's asthma, a disease brought on by coal dust congealing the lungs and seriously impeding breathing. He dreaded too the thought of enforced idleness. He did not relish the idea of a life as a pauper. Sparkling eyes took in the changing vista. Brandon Sidon and Durham Street were left behind. Anna and John Henry Garbutt were off to Durham. Their parents were fulfilling a promise of a Christmas treat for the labour expended in carrying water from the spring in the farmer's field. All 4 still found the train ride exhilarating. A circus was pitched in Durham marketplace, admission being 6pence, and 6pence extra to see the families being fed. The children would be admitted at half price. Robert Hughes, George Mather and Thomas Appleby, all Brandon Colliery pitmen, found their brides locally. They were married at Bransmith by the Reverend Shafto. There were no baptisms of Colliery babies during the year. Hugh MacDermott and Jane, his wife, had baby Catherine baptised at St. Joseph's Catholic Chapel in Elwood, Durham. Out of 40 colliery residents buried at Bransmouth during the year, 26 were infants. Smallpox, scarlet fever and diphtheria kept the vicar and the curate, the Reverend A.L. Butcher, busy performing the last rites. They buried 7 victims during the month of March. Glossary. Cage hole, where the cage settles at the bottom of the shaft. Chaldron, weight of coal 85 pounds. Hawked, coughed up. Phlegm, sticky, mucus, membrane. 10 years old. From the few square inches exposed when the first sod was lifted almost 10 years ago, an expanding, busy and smoky industry has developed. Scores of beehive coke ovens dominate the area south of the pit. Streets run in straight lines to the 4 points of the compass. South, East, West and North streets are occupied. Durham and Sunderland streets, the longest, hug the northeast side of the pit. Men with their families have moved on. The disastrous rocking strike caused an exodus. Men like Will Garbett, Thomas Parrish, Thomas Rumley and Isaac Foster elected to take root in Brandon Colliery. Their children attend Mr. Hoff's school in Brandon Village. Older sons of 11 or 12 have been initiated to pit work as trappers or drivers, or pony drivers. Daughters, with a bit of luck, find employment in Mr. Smith's paper mill. Non-stop work every working day has advanced the main heading and extended the workings in every direction. Pillars of coal have been left in on either side of the heading to lend support. Walls, Jenkins, skirties and windings steadily advance while surface life sleeps. Coal homeward bound meet incoming stone men whose sods dislodge irregular shaped stone, which, if not required for packing, is sent to the surface to enlarge the spoil heap. During the coal drawing shift, almost every cage ascent means that a cubic yard of coal has been used from the vast acreage. The nearest boundary, just a few hundred yards from the shaft bottom in a northeast direction, has been reached, an estimated 15 yards of solid coal being left untouched. Other capitalists have plans to sink a shaft and start a colliery to work the coal beyond the barrier. There is one place in which men like to gather to talk over the events of the day, Joe Addison's Colliery Inn. Amid the pungent smell of pipe smoke, their pints of bitter beer adorn the round, wrought iron tables. Men with Edward Rymer's spirit converse in the bar. Men of spirit, like the men who after the strike a little more than 2 years ago were blacked. Men were forced to move on, hoping that their names and news of their union activities had not reached the ears of the viewer at the colliery of their choice. Coke drawers and coal hewers are in the main thirsty men. By virtue of their manual work, they believe that the regular intake of beer helps replace their lost daily sweat. Joe Addison is certain, as he draws their beer, that the men shift more coke and coal talking in the bar than they do at the jobs. Caleb, Will and George, all pitmen, left the colliery inn. They had discussed pit events. All were loath to tell their wives of the sudden and terrifying cage drop caused by the winder man's neglect. Loath to tell of the foul air in their viewing place, air so bad due to faulty ventilation that the candle almost succumbed. Loath to mention the time when the viewing place set on and having to wait in the dark, cold and wet, until someone approached with a light to rekindle the candle snuffed out by the sudden gush of air caused by the roof fall which had forced them to vacate their place. Loath to mention the anxious time spent dodging the flashing hoofs and swinging limbs of the 12-year-old pony driver's wayward pony. Loath to mention the chilling terror experienced when the steam failed and the ascending pit cage in which they crouched helpless swung alarmingly in the circular void of the shaft. Jane McDermott, Annie and 2 of their neighbours in Railway Street met for their daily gossip. They discussed a common topic, their families. Some had children attending the now crowded school at East Brandon, where they played their boisterous games in a small schoolyard and ran the mile from the village to their home in the Colliery Row. The women had young lads who, on leaving school, would follow their families into the pit to work as trapper boys, pony drivers, helpers, then putters. Sons and daughters would eventually court and marry other colliery residents and settle down in one of the colliery houses. Prospects looked brighter for the pitmen. After much agitation, they are to get a rise in wages of 3p a day. There is much poverty in the area, poverty so acute among widows and their offspring that Lord and Lady Boyne were stirred to help the needy of Brandon, Bransworth and Willington. 2 fat bullocks were killed and distributed, as was a quantity of warm clothing. This is an annual event usually performed during January. Diphtheria and scarlet fever continue to haunt the streets of Brandon Colliery. John Jefferson, a deputy overman at the colliery, hurried home with foreboding. He had just come to bank after his shift in the Hutton seam. His 6-week-old daughter, Elizabeth Annie, was sick when he left home for work. Comforting neighbours in the kitchen of number 25 South Street told the tale. Elizabeth Annie had died during his absence. Margaret Batty, 10 years of age, Edward Blackett, 6 years, Anne Weston, 23 years of age, her 10-month-old daughter, Elizabeth Ann, Thomas Abbott, 9 months, Elizabeth Lamb, 2 years, and George Madison, 1 week, all from Brandon Colliery, succumbed to make the early weeks of the year a time of mourning. The colliery claimed its 3rd victim when John Connor, while easing the trucks at the coke ovens where he was employed as a cinder drawer, got jammed between the wagons. He was crushed so severely that he died from his injuries. March saw the renewal of the early bonds at the colliery. Pitmen are once again playing hell against the system of being tied to one colliery for a full year. They wish to be free to leave a colliery on short notice without fear of prosecution. For several consecutive years, Mr. Smith of Langley Grove has organised the Langley Athletic Sports. On the last day of March, watched by an appreciative crowd, 29 competitors ran in the popular 1-mile race for the Champion Bent Cup. Bookies' voices shouting the odds on the runners drowned the spectators' exhortations. On the Saturday following, the sporting venue was changed. A check ball match was played on Mr. Minto's ball alley just up the road from Langley Grove. Bath Saturday. No work, a good day for sport. Rowdy followers of the game left the bar of the inn and gathered to watch 2 men pit combined strength and skill against a solitary opponent. John Reevely and George Foster, both stripped to the buff, had accepted Jack Dixon's challenge. The match was for £4, Dixon being allowed 3 chalks. Thomas Soulsby from New Bransworth Colliery and Henry Urrington from Brandon Colliery were appointed referees. Dixon took the lead of his 2 opponents and beat them after an exciting game by 1 chalk. The winner was throughout the game the favourite. Betting was brisk, as much as 6-4 being laid on him. All 3 players are co-used in the same seam at Brandon Colliery. Check ball is a popular sport among pitmen. The game provides players with much needed fresh air. It is suited to their physique. The co-using hardens the hands and strengthens shoulder muscles. 6-year-old Minnie Lamb, born at Bransworth Colliery and recently removed from that place to Brandon Colliery, played in the lane which ran from the colliery to East Brandon. It served as playground. West Street just completed, its muddy surrounds, no place in which to play. Mr. Charles White was driving down the lane towards the colliery in a gig. The horse took fright and bolted, running over Minnie. The wood and canvas carriage was smashed to atoms. The driver, on being pitched onto the road, suffered a severely fractured head. The girl died shortly afterwards from her injuries. Minnie's father, Joseph Lamb, a 20-year-old collier, was born at Lumley. His wife, Mary Ann, came from Sherborne. John Leonard, set on at Brandon Colliery, had just recently moved from Willington. He, with his wife and young family, occupied number 8 Railway Street, the first row of single houses to be built at the colliery. Sidings for the colliery coal and coke wagons lay just a few paces from their back door, a dangerous area and out of bounds to children. Tragedy struck during the early afternoon. A 6-year-old girl had given to drink laudanum from a bottle to her 18-month-old brother John Leonard. The baby died at 8 o'clock the same night. Jane McDermott caressed her new baby son in the bed set up in the sitting room of number 16 Railway Street. Number 8, the house of tragedy, is just across the road. Jane reflected on her good fortune and the Leonard's sorrow. Between 500 and 600 young people took advantage of a sunny August bank holiday Monday and no work. What better way to spend it than attend a picnic and ball? The fun continued the whole of Monday night and the greater part of Tuesday. The youth of both sexes from Brandon Colliery, Bransmouth and the surrounding neighbourhood participated in the events. Brandon Colliery youth met at Mr. Bainbridge's 3 Tons Inn at East Brandon before proceeding to Morley Pastures, kindly lent by Viscount Boyne. Cricket, leaping, dancing and other games occupied the large crowd. The Court Pride of Brandon Foresters celebrated in great style on their 6th anniversary. Their festivities less boisterous than the youth of the colliery sat down to a lavish dinner served in the courtroom of the Colliery Inn, the house of Brother Joseph Addison. The Court Pride has enrolled 90 members since its inauguration. Brandon Colliery parents, ever alert in their fight against scarlet fever and diphtheria, were perturbed when news reached them of a case of choleric diarrhea being proved in Durham. A man and his wife reside with their young daughter in the Fighting Cock's yard. The child is very ill. As this is a contagious disease and the inn is set among shops, the colliery folk are loath to visit Durham. Weekend trains are full of passengers as they leave Brandon siding bound for the city. 30 members of the community, 10 less than last year, were interred at Bransmouth. Their ages range from 6 weeks to 70 years. 18 of the total were children. On 6 occasions during the year, couples left Brandon Colliery to be wed at Bransmouth. Jacob Johnson, a policeman from St Mary the Less in Durham, married a Brandon Colliery girl, Susan Davison. He hopes to pound the beat at Brandon. Glossary. Jenkin, a narrow place driven in or along a pillar. Skirty, a place widened to make a flat or siding. Winning, the main place in any district. Going forward. Blacked, when a man suspected of union activity is sacked and his name is forwarded to other colliery owners. Set on, when the strata breaks up and smashes wooden supports. Limbers, portable shafts made of wood and iron. These are attached to the pony. Come to bank, reach the surface. Into 1867. Tuesday, the first working day of the new year, was arranged. 2 slight figures converged on the end of Railway Street. The long streets with their shuttered windows were swathed in darkness. A diffuse glow hovered over the coke ovens. The boys, with some apprehension, headed for the pit. School days just left behind, their 12-hour shift in the pit faced them. With full bait poke swinging from an arm, the new starters paused, gulped, straightened wayward caps, and nervously ascended the steep flight of wooden steps. On the pit head they met other pony drivers and the switchholder, all seasoned pit lads. Tom Welsh's lad, Tom Connolly's lad, came from the banksman, as at 5 a.m. prompt he withdrew the keps and signalled the winder man to drop the cage with his boy occupants. James Welsh, 12 years of age, lived at 24 Railway Street. John Connolly, the same age, lived in nearby South Street. Sons of pitmen, they had, tradition-like, accepted their destiny and followed their fathers down the pit. Thomas Towers, a veteran coal ewer at 24, on filling his 6th tub of coal in the bay pit, laid aside the big-mouthed shovel. January the 2nd was his first shift of the new year. The pit had been idle the day before, it being a public holiday. He had celebrated part of the day in the Colliery Inn. Now he didn't feel up to the task of recovering the lost day's wage. It was bait time. His 2 slices of bread, sprinkled with sugar, were stored in a tin box to protect them from the ravages of the tiny black flies attracted by the candle flame. Thomas declares the flies abound in the vicinity of the pit ponies. Rats too raid the pit clothes, while the ewer sits on his cracked at the cold face. Thomas pulled his coat over his head, tent-like. This protected him from the icy roof water which dropped incessantly. He set his single candle between his legs for added warmth. Rats scurried and squeaked in the stone pack. Here they played, fought, bred and became cannibals. They had presumably found their way into the pit via full choppy bags. Under the influence of the candle's warmth and the previous day's inebriation, his mind dwelt on surface scenes. He thought of Mary, his wife, and their 1-year-old daughter Margaret. They would be up and about at number 14 South Street. He visualised the chimneys of every occupied house in the long street, spiralling sulphurous smoke heavenwards. He thought of them on a night inclined to fog, sending their poisonous fumes down to the ground level, where, aided by smoke from the coke ovens, they seeped indoors and choked the lungs. The rumble of the approaching putter's tub aroused Thomas from his lethargy. With a shrug, he reluctantly discarded his coat and once again wielded his pick. He knew that once he became stiff and cold, work would become doubly hard. Alice MacDermott, now 13 years of age, left her home in Railway Street and walked the mile to the Langley paper mill. Alice worked on a machine called the chopper. She was in the act of trying to stop it for the blacksmith to look at the knives when her hand slipped in amongst the cogwheels. She was immediately sent to the county hospital, suffering from fractured finger, severe lacerations to the hand and shock. Kindly neighbours besieged the MacDermott home to express their sympathy and wish Alice a speedy recovery. Jackie says a 9-year-old, outgrowing his clothes, Gansey sleeves creeping up his arm, tousled fair hair topping a sturdy frame, left his 10-year-old chum Robert Strong. They had enjoyed the sport provided by the cricket club, when they, with other devotees of the summer sport, watched a match played between the Muffs and Duffers of the club. The Muffs won the game. As Jackie turned into Durham Street, he envied Robert, who brought in 5 shillings for working his 6 shifts as a trapper boy in the pit behind Jackie's home, the pit in which the coal ewes are playing hell. The colliery owners are paying the ewes at the rate of 20 100-weight to the ton. The men want it fixed at 20 100-weight to the ton. The present system supplies the owners with 100-weight per ton free of payment. James Welsh and John Connolly, now seasoned pony drivers, walked to work in the dark. It would be dark when they ascended after their 12-hour shift. Their school day friendship had carried on through that first frightening cage ride and the exciting times which followed. After 5 months they were adept at handling pit ponies. Timid Bobby, fiery French, Jock the bright one, and Nelson the strongest of them all. The lads knew the ponies' tantrums, their likes and their dislikes. Sorrow once again visited the Garbutt family when on July the 9th William, almost to the age of breeching, died in his 3rd year. Young William was one of 20 infants born in the colliery rows and buried in the small graveyard lying almost at the foot of the stately castle in the beautiful village of Bransford. George Batty, 10 months old, John Battonsby, only 2 hours, Isabella Crozier, 3 years, Elizabeth Jackson, 10 months, William Soulsby, 3 years, Will Robson, 6 weeks, Anna Thompson, 10 weeks, James Dixon, 3 weeks, Will Soulsby's sister, Elizabeth Soulsby, 8 months, John Henry Hughes, 1 year, 3 months, Anna Lister, 2 years, 3 months, Mary Cummins, 2 months, sisters Anna Forster and Elizabeth Forster, 1¼ years and 2 weeks, Henry Hoggett, 2 years, and Phyllis Lamb, 1 year and 3/4, all joined William Garbutt. The vicar's spirit lifted when he officiated at 2 Christmas weddings. He married Thomas Johnson to Jane Lamb, both from Brandon Colliery at St. Brandon's. Again on the next day when Thomas Watson from the colliery married Catherine Brown of Langley Grove. Glossary. Pithead, structure surrounding the shaft. Keps, a movable ledge on which the cage rests while at the surface. Choppy, chopped up food sent down the pit for the ponies. Into 1868. Heavy snowstorms over the New Year carpeted fields and streets. East Brandon village was isolated. Sleetburn was cut off. 5 feet drifts covered the road from Brandon Colliery. Mr. Hepworth's field and spring lay deep under sparkling virgin snow. No well-worn path to denote the spring's whereabouts. John Henry and Anna Garbutt carried snow and long icicles into their home for conversion into bath and drinking water. The wide Durham Street lay deeply covered in soot-speckled snow. From every house a narrow, man-made path stretched across to the netties. "Hurry up, John! Come on, Anna!" The reluctant pair followed their parents to the small school-cum-chapel. Mr. Love had caused to be built almost in the shadow of the colliery inn. Men with neatly trimmed beards wives sporting their best poke bonnet and children uncomfortably clean, attended for Sunday service. The school obviated for some the walk to East Brandon National School. Mrs. Wheatley, Mrs. Green and Mrs. Francis gazed in wonder. The object of their fascination, a new washing machine which Robert Preston demonstrated in his shop in High Street. At the same price as the more cumbersome cottage mangle, a Harper 12 Trees portable rubber clothes wringer is a good buy. Its rubber rollers prevent injury to buttons. It can be fixed in any tub or washing machine and can wring 3 blankets or sheets in a minute, so says the manufacturer. The admiring women visualised for 30 shillings a much easier wash day than either two. Harper 12 Trees also make the new glycerin soap powder. 1 penny packet will make a pound of glycerin washing soap. James Welsh, the bigger of the two mates, was set on as a helper to a putter. He felt 10 foot tall. His daily wage now being 2 pence more than the 1 shilling and 6 he had earned as a pony driver. Sent to work in another district, he missed John's company. He missed too the pit ponies, some he had grown to love. His favourite, Jock, a well-built creature with a definite horsey smell, was a bright one. He could count. Attached 4 tubs to his limbers. As he moves forward, Jock's head nods knowingly with each coupling click. On hearing the clicks, he keeps going. If he wanted 5 tubs moving, James kept the last coupling tight. Jock, on counting 3 coupling clicks, moved blissfully on. Continued on side 4. Chimney smoke from pit and colliery houses hovers on the horizon. New collieries are producing coal at nearby Langley Moor, Sleetburn and Ushermoor. Thomas Towers, formerly of Brandon Colliery, now works adjacent Langley Moor Colliery. Challenged a man from Ushermoor Colliery to a game of Nerd and Spell. Pitmen from Brandon Colliery walked a mile to Langley Moor to watch the match played for a stake of £10 a side. The game consisted of 30 rises each. Towers, vocally encouraged by supporters from his old colliery, won by 27 score. No easing of Brandon Colliery residents' burden. They are hard pressed. The long summer drought is making heavy demands on the known springs and streams in the area. Water is scarce and slow running. The queues for water lengthening. Down Andy Garbett and his mates had a bonanza. Whilst awaiting their turn at the spring, they scoured Farmer Hepworth's field, the bumper crop of early mushrooms being much appreciated. Farmers in the district are furious. There being much damage done by the mushroom pickers. The year's total of 31 deaths, 23 of whom were infants, spread sorrow throughout the colliery rows. Scarlet fever seriously depleted the ranks of the very young. 8 Brandon Colliery grooms signed the register in St. Brandon's. All the brides came from Brandon Colliery's several streets. Glossary. Helper, a lad who helps the putter when there is a gradient leading from the Ew's place. Hole, advancing through solid coal. Canny hands, good players. Into 1869. James Davison, a vagrant, doubtless after New Year cheer, taking advantage of the dark surround of Brandon Colliery railway station, decided on forced entry. He was caught red-handed and committed to prison for 6 weeks hard labour as a rogue and vagabond. The village of Bransford was in rejoicing mood on January the 11th. It had been the birthday of the son and heir to the Bransford estates. Merry peals from the bells of the old church echoed throughout the day. Guns were fired at intervals until late at night. Sound from bells and guns drifting over fields could be heard quite clearly in Brandon Colliery. During 3 days of the revelry, George William Marshall 5 months, Robert Dixon 1 week, Elizabeth Lamb 11 months, and James Foster 8 years of age, all Brandon Colliery children, made their last journey, the 2 miles from their home to Bransford St. Brandon's graveyard. All 4 children were interred by the curate, the Reverend William Henderson Pritchard, within sound of banquet and ball for over 100 guests and a lavish dinner and dancing for the estate workers. February followed with 3 more bodies for burial in St. Brandon's graveyard. Hannah Lamb, 26 years of age, and mother of baby Elizabeth Lamb, accompanied Mary Elizabeth Lawson, 1 year old, and John William Rain, 9 days. During March the sad cortege of death continued. Ellen Welsh aged 63, George Coverdell 1 month, Elizabeth Payson Preston 7 years, and her 4-year-old brother Robert died on the same day. Margaret, daughter of Hugh MacDermott, was buried in Durham, where she was baptised 10 months ago. James Needham, not long arrived from Ormskirk in Lancashire, left school one Friday. He was pleased with himself. Hadn't he a certificate? He was 11 and could read and write. The piece of paper said so. This entitles him to leave school and seek employment. James started work underground on the following Monday. His brother John, a 13-year-old putter, accompanied him to work. James, still shaking after sudden cage descent, was sent some hundreds of yards in by. Without initiation, he began his 12-hour shift. He operated the heavy wooden door installed for pit ventilation. This he opened on the putter's arrival. Jim's pay of 5 shillings for 6 shifts' work will help succour their large family. John Henry Garbutt, his sister Hannah, Will Dippy, Isaac Lamb, Tom Lidster, Will and Margaret Ross. Some had left school, others awaited their turn, were gathered at the end of their street. Durham Street's gable end made an ideal ball alley. Their boisterous play suddenly ceased. Look at the bonny sky! The whole sky was filled with streamers of red and white light which radiated from a fixed point in the heavens called the corona. For the first time in their young lives they beheld the aurora borealis. The aurora reached its greatest brilliance just as they, with some reluctance, retired to bed, the awesome spectacle leaving an indelible mark on their minds. Mr. Madison, the master sinker, on orders from the owners of Brandon Colliery, continued sinking below ground from the hutton seam now being worked, whose 2 feet 8 inches layer of coal lay 157 feet from the surface. Sinkers planned to penetrate the top harvest seam, which is coal 1 feet 8 inches thick, then down to the bottom harvest seam, with its 2 feet seam, and onto the busty seam, where the 4 feet 1 inch seam of coal is bound in the middle by a 1 inch layer of stone band. The sinker's ultimate goal being the Brockwell seam, with rich coking coal in its 2 feet 10 inch seam, plus valuable Sega lying 522 feet from the surface. When these seams are producing coal, Brandon Colliery will indeed be a place of importance. Discontent prevails among the country's coal users. In an attempt to quell the unrest, the coal owners introduced a new idea. The new sliding scale would fix the use price per tonne according to the price prevailing on the London Coal Exchange. As the scale of price fluctuates, so too does their ewing prices. An independent accountant is engaged to assess the market prices over a 3 or 4 month period. From these prices he works out the rise or fall in the percentage due to the men. Will Hartley, Thomas Rumley, George Madison, Owen Kelly and Francis Vasey are all coal users at the colliery. Some are sceptical of the scheme, others think it will be to their advantage. As the sliding scale was being launched, miners at the Boyne pit just down the road from Brandon Colliery and almost within hailing distance, after a week out on strike, went back to work. They had rebelled against adverse working conditions. 2 weddings took place on the same day. Both brides live at Brandon Colliery. James Blenkinsop Jr. of No. 1 Railway Street married Margaret Mills. They had travelled to Durham Register Office. The other ceremony took place in St. Brandon's in the village of Branspeth. The new curate, the Reverend John Harrison Bender, officiated when Thomas Rapheppel, a 22-year-old schoolmaster from Crogsdale, married Catherine Ann Ford, a 19-year-old schoolmistress. They moved into 24 North Street. They were given their new home, a colliery house with 1 room down and 1 room up, by virtue of their profession. School teachers being as vital to the community as the pit itself, they were assured work. The same curate baptised Harriet, the new baby daughter of William and Sarah Garbutt. 10-year-old John Kenny travelled to Durham with his widowed mother. This was no picnic outing. He had been charged by P.C. Graham with having committed wilful damage to the amount of 1 penny to a wheat field belonging to Mr. Hewitson, farmer of Brandon. Kenny had been trespassing to get water. His mother told the magistrate, the Reverend A.D. Shafto, that they had no water at all. The boy was ordered to pay expenses of 4 shillings and 6pence. Following the report of the Kenny case, a Durham Advertiser reporter visited Brandon Colliery. His remarks were published in his paper. In some of the colliery districts about Brandon, there is absolutely no supply of water provided by the colliery owners for the families of the workmen they have brought upon the spot, and the poor creatures have to trespass upon the lands of the neighbouring farmers to procure by stealth even a limited supply of this essential of health and comfort. In such a case, who would be to blame if a fatal epidemic broke out in consequence of the enforced habits of uncleanliness in which the people are now living? Surely a grave responsibility rests upon the colliery owners who, while enriching themselves by the rights of property, are so singularly unmindful of the duties which property confers. Once again the Durham Advertiser has proved itself a champion of the underprivileged. At last the pitmen of Durham County are realising that unity means strength. On November the 20th, the Durham district of the Miners' National Association was formed, the first meeting being held in George Oswald's Market Hotel, Durham. Although only 4 or 5 collieries showed interest enough to send delegates, a new spirit is awakening among the pitmen. Brandon Colliery was not represented at the meeting. The idea of a strong association should catch on. It is proposed that the contribution of 3p a week to the association would secure labour protection only. 6p a week would provide labour protection, death, sickness and accident benefits. Christmas Eve shoppers boarded the train at Brandon siding to visit Durham's provision market, where they found food prices steady. Potatoes are selling at 6p a stone, chickens 1 shilling and 6p each, beef 7p halfpenny a pound, pork 10p a pound. For those who had saved hard, a turkey could be bought for 5 shillings. 3 weeks old Alice Dawson died on New Year's Eve, to make a total of 29 deaths in the colliery rows during 1869 into 1870. Rows of colliery-owned houses, some single, some double, are being built to shelter workmen and their families. More pit ponies occupy underground stables. More coal ewers have signed the bond despite a report of slack time at some collieries in the county. Putters and drivers are engaged, the latter to transport the coal. Underground workings are spreading tentacle-like in several directions. On Saturday, March the 5th, bond signing took place at all the collieries in the county. Pitmen at Brandon Colliery, like their counterparts elsewhere, are showing a general repugnance to the system. They dislike being bound to serve a particular master for a 12-month. Jack jumps into the train at Brandon siding. He saw Tommy sitting with his ring of picks, ready sharpened for coal hewing at another colliery. He hadn't signed the bond. "Where's the gun, Tommy?" asked Jack. "Has gone to Northumberland," replied Tommy. "Where's Northumberland?" asked Jack. "About 5 miles yon side of Newcastle," answered Tommy. Brandon A. Pit Busty Seam, now working and producing coal, has had its prices fixed. Simon Tate, Walter Cowell, John Vasey and John Roper Scales, all coal hewers, hope to benefit. The whole price is settled at 7 shillings and 6p per score of tubs filled. The score too has been revised. It is now 20 tubs instead of 21. The men reckon that they can now earn 8 shillings and 7p halfpenny for every 20 tubs filled, which is 1 shilling and a penny a ton, or just over 5p a tub after the addition of 15%. Villagers and estate workers mourned the loss at Bransworth Castle of Lady Boyne, wife of Viscount Boyne. After the funeral, the Viscount retired to his residence in Belgrave Square, London. Landowner and residents of the colliery shared grief. 15 inhabitants of the colliery being interred at St Brandon's during the first 5 months of the year, 13 being infant victims of diphtheria and scarlet fever. Large families occupy most of the 3-roomed houses in numbers 1 to 33 South Street. John Brady moved into number 6, a 3-roomed house with a small kitchen and a low attic approached by a stepladder. It has a small, walled paved yard with an open channel passing from the top of the street, which carries daily refuse. 10 people share the house. John, a coal hewer, aged 31, and his 27-year-old wife Mary, both were born in Ireland, a 5-year-old schoolgirl daughter Mary Ann, a 15-year-old servant girl, Eliza McLaughlin, engaged in Durham hirings, helps look after the 5 lodges, comprised of 3 coal hewers, a coke filler and a mason's labourer, all in their early 20s. The servant girl's 14-year-old sister, also from Durham Hirings, works for Thomas and Bridget Conley in number 7 South Street. The Conleys have 6 sons, 4 of whom are pitmen. Thomas is a coal hewer, James is a putter, John and Charles are pony drivers in the Hutton Seam. Jackie Sayres, now 12 and growing fast, relinquished his job as a trapper lad. He fancied the more active life of a pony driver. Besides, he would earn 1 shilling and 6pence a day, almost double the wage of a trapper lad. Jackie's new job took him nearer the hewing places. He kept the putters supplied with empty tubs and removed their full tubs as they brought them from the hewer's place to the flat. Jackie's Galloway, a spirited 4-year-old stallion, reminded him of the ponies he had seen in the colliery field during the strike, when as a lad of 5 he had watched the impromptu rodeo from the summit of the spoil heap. The literary needs of the pitmen are catered for. Daily deliveries of the paper just introduced, the Northern Echo, suggest closer ties with other areas. Good news for readers of the Durham Advertiser. That worthy paper has been reduced in price from 2p halfpenny to 2p for 8 pages of weekly news. The fearful distress caused in the district due to the water shortage caused more than 100 colliery inhabitants to sign a petition calling on the local authorities to hold a public meeting to consider the best means to secure a supply of water. The need is so great that prompt measures are necessary. While women and children queued for a supply of spring water, now reduced to a trickle, men gathered to watch the game of fives, a popular game among pitmen. In the heat from an August sun, 2 men stripped to their buff waited at Brandon Colliery ball alley. That versatile sportsman George Mann sized up his opponent John Kelly. They prepared to do battle for £6 a side, both men being noted for their superior playing. A great deal of money was bet on the event. Amid loud vocal encouragement, Kelly, the favourite, went in first. He played 5. Mann followed with 3. After some good playing, Mann finished the game with 19 chalks to spare, the final score being 33 for Mann, Kelly 14. Mann lives at 26 Durham Street, Kelly at 27 South Street. Both men are coal hewers. The petition adopted at the public meeting held at Brandon Colliery concerning the water supply was signed by a further 100 inhabitants, including farmers of the district. The Reverend Shafto presented the petition to Lord Boyne and their Honour Hamilton Russell on behalf of the parishioners. Mr. Hamilton Russell promised to take measures to relieve the distress. He and Lord Boyne sent a letter to the Guardian of Brandon stating the importance of the matter and gave their agents for the Bransmouth estates instructions to take immediate action. The people of the district, for the second time in a few weeks, witnessed a sky bursting with colour. 15-year-old John Henry Garbutt and his mates considered themselves privileged once again to behold the aurora borealis. Eyes gazed in wondrous awe at the heavenly display, which was most brilliant between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. when the shooting rays of light reached their zenith. The middle of October was exceptionally good for blackberry picking. School children and others so inclined cashed in on the harvest. Laden buses supplied large quantities of fruit. Pickers sold the berries for 2p a quart to strangers from Sunderland, who in turn sold them at 6p a quart in their market. Farmers once again complained of damage done to hedgerow and field. A field owned by Mr. Elliott of Brandon Hall was loaned for the occasion. Followers of the sport of Nerd and Spell awaited the arrival of the contestants. George Mann from Brandon Colliery had selected as his opponent Thomas Towers, who had come from nearby Sleetburn Colliery. Both men, canny hands at the game, had such faith in their ability that they bet £10 each. The betting on both men was heavy. An exciting match was watched from 1 o'clock. The result of their meeting was so close that each man was matched to play again in a month for £20 a side at the same place. On Thursday, November the 10th, the Primitive Methodist Chapel held a temperance meeting which was chaired by John Morley. Archibald Thompson, colliery cashier and a preacher, made a speech of wit and humour which kept the meeting in roars of laughter. A fruit banquet was also held in the chapel to help pay for the new harmonium installed a short time ago. Baskets of fruit were presented for the occasion. John Wayne of the Boyne Colliery greatly enlivened the company with some excellent temperance melodies. A young couple who had recently got married decided that after tea one Sunday they would have a walk to see his mother, who happened to be living close to the chapel where they were married. On arrival at Geordie's, who was a bit of a naturalist, they found him sitting in the corner of the fireplace listening to the strains of about half a dozen crickets. At the same time the choir in the chapel close by was singing that well-known hymn, "Leave me not, for I am lonely." "Listen," said the newly married woman, "what beautiful singing." "Ah," said Geordie, "they do it by rubbing their hind legs together." Men forgot their beer as they sat in the Red Lion Inn. They were abruptly reminded of their hazardous occupation when a man burst into the bar and silenced all with the remark, "There's a man just fallen down the Boyne pit shaft." The new sinking lies a short distance from the inn. Being Sunday and a day given to shaft repair, William Russell was repairing a portion of the shaft when he fell from the cage into the sump and was killed instantly. Later, a verdict of accidental drowned was passed at the inquest held in Jonathan Hopper's Inn, Langley Moor. Messrs. Straker and Love are opposed to the union. Men at our collieries of Brandon and Bransworth are being sacked for attending union meetings. Non-union men are making it difficult for men of the union to improve their conditions of work. Matthew Oliver, Henry Madison and George Handley, all union men, after a lifetime spent in the pit, foresee a brighter future. A momentous occasion. On December the 3rd, the first annual meeting of the Durham Miners Association was held in George Oswald's Market Hotel, Durham. 15 collieries sent delegates to the meeting, a big increase on November of last year when only 4 or 5 collieries were represented. Membership of the association is growing fast. After only 1 year it stands at 1899. Brandon Colliery, though having a union, is not yet a member of the Durham Miners Association. Tom Rumley, a 30-year-old collier from South Etton, worked double with Bob Daines, a collier down from Cumberland. "What's that noise, Bob?" shouted the startled Tom. Their Ewan cable was near Jim Skilcorn's place, from which came the sound very much like an explosion. They knew the deputy who fired the shots was not in the near vicinity. Urgent nags carried them to Jim's place. Acrid fumes filled the air and their nostrils. Their worst fears seemed justified. Jim's inert body lay sprawled on the floor of the seam. Jim, a collier, aged 37, a widower of just 1 month, looked after his 4 daughters at 30 South Street. Their ages ranged from 5 months to 14 years. His late wife, Mary Jane, was also 37 years of age. He finished drilling the last hole in the obstinate coal, spat on his hands, and stood back to appraise his work. He had laboured the greater part of his shift at the irksome task of curving the jud. Now he anticipated the mound of loose coal dislodged by the shots. Jim loaded a hole with 3 inches of gun cotton and placed a can of powder upon it. While in the act of forcing the coal pricker through the cotton, it exploded without warning. Jim's injuries were found to be severe. He is likely to suffer permanent blindness. Part of one hand was blown off, the other being badly mutilated. Jane, aged 57 and wife of John Rain, was the last of 38 Brandon Colliery residents to die during the year. Glossary. Sump. Well at the bottom of the shaft where pit water collects prior to pumping to the surface. Curving the jud, when the top half of the seam of coal is hewed out to derive the most benefit from the shots. Can, a tin containing explosives. Into 1871. There are now 260 houses in Brandon Colliery occupied by colliery employees. Men and boys work the 4 seams. The Busty, Harvey, Ballarat and Brockwell seams are fully operational. The prices have also been fixed for the C-pit seam. They are, with the addition of 15% whole, for 3 feet of coal and above, 14 shillings and 4pence per score. For 2 feet 10 inches of coal and under 3 feet, 15 shillings and 3pence per score. For 2 feet 8 inches of coal and under 2 feet 10 inches, 15 and 10pence per score. For 2 foot 6 inches of coal and under 2 feet 8 inches, 16 and 4pence per score. Brandon Colliery has seen the first generation grow, born almost within the shadow of the pit heapstead, weaned, breeched, a brief period of schooling, then work at an early age. John Eyre, at the age of 10, is a colliery labourer. He works on the screens. John's mate and neighbour lives at number 31 South Street. Thomas Rumley is a screener at 9 years and a half. George Blenton's shop, the same age, is similarly employed. He lives in nearby 1 East Street. Isabel Addison was born in the colliery inn, only a few steps from the A-pit shaft. At 9 years of age, she attends the National School at East Brandon with her 2 sisters, Elizabeth and Mary Ann. As the colliery expands, their services will be required in the colliery inn. The Coverdale, Walsh, Jefferson, Carroll, Garr, Gelly and Lithgow families welcome the Mines Regulation Bill passed in March. It is a good one. Will the Act be carried out to the letter? It suggests that boys less than 12 years of age be not employed underground. The pitmen envy their German counterparts, whose boys are not allowed underground until they reach the age of 16. John Carroll and his wife moved to Brandon Colliery from Seaton Colliery 10 years ago. They have seen the colliery develop. Their home at number 19 South Street houses 3 daughters and a son, 3 Coleos and a colliery cartman lodge with them. John Jefferson, a deputy overman from North Shields, came to Brandon Colliery with his wife Jane and 2-year-old Anna. They, like the Colliery family, have seen the growth of the colliery in their 8 years of residence at number 25 South Street. Michael Garr and Peter Gelly live in the same street. Michael is 12 years of age and needs water in the pit. Peter is 11, was born in Southwick and is a pony driver at the colliery. The Coverdale family lives at number 23 Railway Street. Mary Coverdale is 13 and helps her mother run the household, consisting of 4 brothers and 6 lodgers. 1 lodger, Harry Lithgow, is a Coleo from Lancashire. The other 5 are quarry labourers employed at East Brandon. They come from Newcastle and far off Devon. William Coverdale, the eldest son, is 12 and is a pony driver. Catherine Walsh, an Irish woman and widow at 49, looks after her family of 6 sons and 2 daughters in the end house of Railway Street, number 24. There's Thomas at 19, a Coleo and chief breadwinner. John is 17 and is a putter. James is 16, he also puts. Edward, the youngest worker, is 14 and is a helper underground. Their eldest sister Mary is 12. Like her friend next door, she helps run the house. Richard is now 73 years of age, retired from his job as colliery cartman, now enjoys the more mundane position of housekeeper. His grandson, now 13, is a pony driver. Richard and his wife Mariah have 2 boarders. 11-year-old Tom Williamson is a colliery screener. He was born at Newcastle. Johnson Rickaby, a 24-year-old Coleo, was born at Lumley. They all live in a 2-roomed house at number 8 East Street. All these families are apprehensive, having heard of 3 fatal cases of smallpox found in Durham during the first week of March. There are 6 inmates of the county prison and 2 in the union workhouse suffering from the disease. As Durham is a busy shopping area, fears are entertained about containing the outbreak. Many Brandon Colliery folk travel the 3 miles to Durham for their weekly shopping. Father Smith led his pony up the steep slope of Bernigal Bank. He had left Crogsdale behind, just across the River Wear, where his small church nestled among the trees at the riverside. He straightened gaiters, buttoned up his long black coat and secured his black silk top hat. The reverend gentleman was bound for Brandon Colliery, where the Catholic population sought his ministry. Mr. Love kindly provided a house in Durham Street. Number 62 is used as a church. Father Smith also teaches catechism on Sunday afternoons in private houses. Alice Dolan and Elizabeth Fagan, both teachers, run the small church-cum-school. It is sandwiched between number 61, occupied by 28-year-old Robert Innes and his family, and number 63, where John Cummins, also 28, lives. Father Smith had on the previous day married in the chapel at Crogsdale Alice McNamara, an Irish girl living at number 11 South Street, to Michael Keenan, Michael came from Washington to Colio at the colliery. For the present he lives with his bride. They will be given the first available single colliery house. Father Smith is greatly perturbed, as are all other local ministers, over the large number of deaths occurring in Brandon Colliery, 6 or 7 every month, most of whom are children. Great local interest was aroused, it being Saturday and a warm May day. A crowd of supporters had gathered to watch, cheer and bet on the main event. Thomas Foster had cracked out William White to a foot race. Both men reside at Brandon Colliery. The race was for £5 a side. Foster led from start to finish. Amid cheers, he won with a lead of 5 yards. No sport or large gatherings of people during June. Early in the month, smallpox spread to Brandon Colliery. 4 infants were stricken, all cases proving fatal. They were buried at St. Brandon's. Colliery people live in fear of their lives and those of their families. They realise that bad sanitary conditions and the absence of fresh water, tap water hurdles such diseases. The literary needs of the colliery workforce are catered for with the opening of the new reading room and institute. The ceremony took place on Monday, July the 3rd, witnessed by a large and appreciative crowd. It is situated near the top of Durham Street and on the verge of the Langley Moor East Brandon Road. 60 men immediately joined as members. Lord Boyne, the Reverend Shafto and Messrs Straker and Lowe have announced their intention of becoming honorary members. The Institute will be the centre of colliery social activity. Summer outings, as always, are well attended. A gala and picnic was organised by the Foresters Court Pride of Brandon No. 3333. Members and their families noisily assembled outside Joseph Addison's Colliery Inn. The pulley wheels on the nearby pit head, motionless after a week of almost continuous activity. The Brandon and Boyne Band led a cavorting parade round the colliery rows before marching past the fiery heap and onto a field in the beautiful valley of the DNS, where the Sleepburn String Band awaited them. After a strenuous afternoon, during which a kite match, handicap foot race, football match, ladies and young girls races took place, 400 hungry revellers sat down to tea. The Colliery Inn was again at the meeting point when a kite match was arranged to be played there. A spirited crowd, composed mainly of pitmen, gathered to watch and bet on the encounter between Thomas Soulsby of Brandon Colliery, the favourite, and Rob Johnson of Waterhouse's Colliery. Both men, players of note, after a warming up session to get the feel of the kites, began the game for £5 a side. 33 chalks up. Soulsby soon had the measure of his opponent and won 33 chalks to 19. Undaunted, the loser challenged Soulsby to a return match during August for £10 a side, the game to be played on a neutral ground, Keepier Gardens, Durham. Bath Saturday, August the 12th. Pit lads and mates, Jackie Sayers and James Needham, both 13 years of age, walked to Durham to attend the miners' great demonstration. They joined excited crowds heading in that direction. They walked through Langley Moor, Stonebridge, Neville's Cross and onto Wharton Park near Durham railway station, where a mass meeting came to order at noon. Jackie and James were among the 5,000 who paid for admission. 4 men occupied the platform, men renowned for their oratory. They came from Glasgow, Barnsley, North Staffordshire and Sunderland. After the heartening speeches, a band contest entertained the crowd. £20 was offered in 3 prizes. One Staffordshire man sang a melody. It is a glorious union, denied who can, that defends the right of the working man. Mount Beulah, the spacious home of Mr. Love, the colliery owner, lies just up the road. No doubt he would sense the spirit of unity which drew the men to Wharton Park. He would in all probability have heard the defiant speakers. Having listened to the orations and enjoyed the lively band music, the lads returned home inspired by the spirit of the day. The gathering of pitmen was the largest held to date. After evident success, some talk of more and bigger meetings in the future. Patrick Mann, a sturdy 12-year-old pit lad, sprawled across the qualled kitchen floor of 21 Railway Street. After working his 12-hour shift at putting tubs in the mine, he was too weary even to undress himself. Patrick was born in Durham. His brother James and his eldest brother Thomas, at 16 and 18, are Collieries in the same seam. Their father, Thomas Moran, Irish-born, is 40 years of age and is a colliery screener. Anne, their mother, is 2 years his senior. She too was born in Ireland. Patrick's mother, raven hair tied in a bun, busied herself about the kitchen. 12 tins of rising dough are slit from before the hot fire to make room for the tin bath. A large pan of broth simmered excitingly on the fire hob. After much cajoling and a little help, Patrick stripped to the waist and wearily washed his upper body. On drying himself on a square piece of iron, he glanced manfully towards his mother, her billowing skirt effectively screening the door, as with her back to Patrick she gazed into the yard. Pit hoggers, boots and pit stockings add to the clothes already on the floor. Patrick completed his bath. As he shouted, "More, I'm hungry," Mrs. Moran furtively brushed a tear from her cheek. There is a great demand for coal. The Industrial Revolution is well into its stride. Men have arrived from all parts. Workers with their families have come from Ireland. The men came chiefly to work in the coke yards as coke drawers, coke burners and labourers. Some start as coal ewers, their sons invariably following them into the pit. The colliery houses of the 2 South Streets, 2 Railway Streets, Durham Street, North, East and West Streets are occupied. The immigrants include John Dunn from Durham, James Harrison from Spennymoor, Will Hargrave from Middlesex, Nicholas Lockie from Northumberland, Michael Keeney from Walsingham, John Story from Jarrow, Harry Lithgow from Lancashire, Will Garbett and Will A from Yorkshire, Will Devine from Cumberland. Others arrived from Bishop Auckland, Crook, Ortonley Spring, Ryhope, Devonshire, Scotland, Wales, Derby, Seaton, Westmoreland and nearby Sunderland Bridge. A family had come from the Isle of Man. Among the men are pitmen, cokeyard workers, agricultural labourers, quarrymen, railwaymen, masons and joiners with their labourers, blacksmiths, an underground agent and a policeman. Patrick pushed aside the large empty bowl. "Where's me Gonzi, Ma?" he piped. A familiar shouted, "Is Patrick ready?" announced the arrival of Patrick's mates. Little John Fox, a screen at the colliery, picks stones from the coal sent out of the pit. John is 11 years of age and lives at number 4 South Street. Brothers William and John Batty, 13 and 12 years of age, are pony drivers in the B pit and live at number 10 South Street. John Connolly, 14, and his brother Charles, who is 11, are pony drivers. They live at number 7 South Street. All 6 work the same shift at the nearby pit. They had moved to Brandon Colliery from far off Broughton in Yorkshire, Northumberland, Northallerton, Durham and Spennymoor. They sauntered toward the village on the hill. Smoke belched from the tall chimneys serving coke ovens at the surrounding collieries. Usher College, Durham Castle and Cathedral stood majestic on the horizon. Penshire Monument, bold in outline, looked very much like a giant multi-legged table. Tired after their long shift in the pit, the lads returned home. The flame of the oil lamp set on the kitchen table spluttered in smoky protest as Patrick Moran opened the door of number 21 Railway Street. The cries of his pals, "See you in the morning, Paddy," ringing in his ears. Joseph Lamb, who lives next door at number 20 Railway Street, is an old man of 63. He was born in Chester Street and is the colliery caller and watcher. He would rouse the lads at 4 o'clock next morning for the next shift. Anna Hay is 17. She works with her friend Alice McDermott at Mr. Smith's paper mill. Alice is a womanly 18-year-old. Her brother Edward, now 12, is a pony driver. October was a tragic month. 7 deaths being recorded in the colliery rows. On the 10th, Anne, a 20-year-old wife of Charles Foggs, died. 5 days later, Charles died at the age of 25. Tragedy stalked number 30 North Street. Frank Telford, a 13-year-old screener at the colliery, was enjoying the ride in the empty tubs his 3 workmates pushed along the wooden gangway at work. Youthful exuberance was abruptly stifled when the tub and its occupant careened over the side of the gangway. They fell 12 feet to the ground. Frank's chest being so crushed, he died in great agony. He was one of 6 sons. He had 2 sisters. Frank was born in South Shields. His 4 younger brothers were born in Brandon Colliery. Robert Telford, the bereaved father, is a 30-year-old coal hewer. The Boyne and Brandon Brass Band was called on to render sacred music to the appreciative music lovers in the music room of the Boyne Hotel, a lengthy rendering of popular airs being well received, the band's popularity being reflected in the generous silver collection. Sounds of merriment emanated from Joe Addison's Colliery Inn. The landlord's daughter, 20-year-old Jane Madison, had on the morning married Robert Jamison Rowell, a Crogsdale schoolmaster in the parish church there. Jane and her younger sister are efficient and popular barmaids. The young bride will be greatly missed by the inn's patrons when she moves to Crogsdale. The dreaded smallpox has again attacked the colliery inhabitants. Social gatherings are once again severely curtailed. 11 souls died during November, some from the disease. Brandon Village too is under attack from the scourge, which is set to flourish where sanitary conditions are bad. December will long be remembered with a death occurring almost daily. On the 8th, Harriet, the daughter of William Garbutt, died. She was 2 years and 3 months. A tragic yearly total of 90 deaths in the colliery row is being recorded, a shocking reminder that smallpox and other diseases greatly depletes a community. Glossary: breeched, out of baby clothes and into breeches or trousers. Screener: one who removes stone from the coal tipped onto the screen. Cracked out, challenged. Harn, rough material like sacking. Into 1872. No Happy New Year for Collier Roland Richardson. Roland, 37 years of age, lives at number 29 North Street. His wife Isabella died at the age of 35, leaving 5 sons and 1 daughter in his care. Michael, his eldest son at 13, is a letter carrier. He was born at Portsmouth. The others were born in Brandon Colliery. The pitmen of Durham County are showing strength and determination. At the same time, efforts are being made to work in closer harmony with the coal owners. More collieries are joining the union. Brandon Colliery, long isolated, has joined the Durham Miners Association. On Saturday, January the 27th, the Council of Delegates of the above association met in the Guildhall in Durham Marketplace. The marketplace took on a busier aspect as the 129 delegates representing 14,000 workers gathered. Brandon Colliery Union sent a delegate to the meeting. Delegates agreed that all organised collieries use their influence with their employers to get the 4th shift for the men put back till 4 in the morning. Delegates reported the growing discontent concerning the pitmen's yearly bond. They say that meetings are being held in almost every colliery village deploring the bond. They seek a fortnightly agreement. Pitmen Robert Metcalf, William Jones, Jonah Hudson, Joseph Lucas and others sense a significant change in their lives. Excitement is mounting. February the 17th was an important day for them and all pitmen in the county. The first joint meeting between the Durham Miners Association and the Coal Owners Association took place. Hitherto some owners had acted as though their power was limitless. Pitmen believe that the new arrangement will be to their advantage. About a score of employers' representatives and 10 delegates representing 20,000 workmen took part in the conference. The first question for discussion was brought forward, the controversial yearly binding. The owners were willing to abolish it and suggested a monthly or fortnightly agreement. The miners' delegates accepted the latter. The pitmen's delegates also pressed for a 35% increase of wages. The owners, after much discussion, granted them 20%. Men left the meeting and stepped out in the open, pleased with the outcome. They were convinced that the better era for Durham mining was at hand. At the meeting it was arranged that in future a joint committee of masters and men should settle all disputes that arose. A long row of houses and shops has been built. The new street runs parallel with West Street and is aptly named Commercial Street, in place of High Street, as the first few shops and houses were named. The extensive population has increased the number of primitive Methodists. Chapel goers anxious to erect a chapel to suit their requirements have signed an agreement with Lord Boyne. A plot of ground situated at the top of West Street has been leased. This land covers 741 square yards and has been offered at a ground rent of 5 shillings per annum for 50 years, the condition being that a carriageway and footpath be maintained. 6 miners, George Madison, Richard Kirsup, Ralph Marley, Ronald Richardson, Daniel Evans and Frederick Lighton were chosen as trustees together with James Robson, shoemaker, Thomas Watson, coke burner, James Watson, grocer, John Pratt, labourer and John Fowle, mason. 11 men well able to serve the primitive Methodists of Brandon Colliery. Colliery expansion and more workers attract salesmen from afar. Robert Sharp, a travelling auctioneer's clerk, appeared for the 3rd time on a charge of stealing a sovereign, the monies of George Mann, a collier of 26 Durham Street. Mann had called in at the sale room and bought a muffler for 6pence. He tendered in payment what he thought was a shilling and received 5 pence halfpenny back in change. On getting home he discovered that he had given a sovereign instead. He hurried back to the sale, being held in the Colliery Inn. The defendant repudiated all knowledge of the gold coin. Some witnesses present at the sale asserted it was a sovereign, or something like one. Others averred it was only a shilling. After hearing the evidence on both sides, the bench at Durham Court dismissed the defendant. A man from the colliery had bought an 8-day watch. He lost no opportunity of showing it to his mates, one of whom, after a few weeks, asked how his watch was going. "Oh, fine, man," replied the owner of the watch. "I used to wind it up every Saturday, but that was rather long for it, so wind it up every Friday now." Scarlet fever is claiming more victims. Louise, the 5-month-old daughter of Ronald Richardson, one of the trustees of the proposed new chapel, was buried at Branspeth. She was born at number 29 North Street. Her death makes the 14th in the Colliery Rows in 4 months. The Reverend William Fawcett recalled that his first parochial duty was that of burying the infant's mother, Isabella Richardson, who died in January at the age of 35. Peter Nyland of 13 Railway Street chatted with his friend and workmate James Allen, who lives at number 20 Railway Street. Peter is 14 years of age and was born in Ormskirk in Lancashire. James, also 14, was born in Yorkshire. Both are putters in the B pit. They discussed a new pit arrangement which affected them personally. It referred to lying money. Hand putters are to be paid 4 pence and pony putters to get 3 pence for every hour they have to wait for tubs because of misadventure in the pit and when no work was provided for them. If they have to do other work, they will be paid 6 pence and 4 pence an hour respectively. They recalled the time they lay about, wet and cold, for 4 hours when a tub fell down the shaft. They got no pay for that. Continued on side 5.